This series was made possible by generous donations from the Westridge Foundation, MoAD members, and all of you. Thank you so much. I am thrilled today to be joined by Pamela Phatsimo Sunstrum, born in 1980 in Mochudi, Botswana. Pamela's multidisciplinary practice encompasses drawing, painting, installation, and animation. Her work alludes to mythology, geology, and theories on the nature of the universe. Sunstrum's drawings take the form of narrative landscapes that appear simultaneously futuristic and ancient, shifting between representational and fantastical depictions of volcanic, subterranean, cosmological, and precipitous landscapes. And I am not, Pamela's, CV of achievements are pages and pages long. We will talk about that throughout the conversation. And I am just thrilled to have you. Welcome, Pamela.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so pleased to be here.
Yes, me as well. This has been, I often say that I'm really excited about the conversations in the Artist Studio, but I'm extraordinarily excited to be in conversation with you today.
Thanks.
Yeah, I've been anticipating it the whole time.
Thanks. I'm really glad to be here. And I think it's special to have still, even now in these maybe almost post-pandemic times, to still have these virtual meetings are sort of now becoming a little bit special, that the real world is opening up. So it's good in terms of access that we get to still have conversations like this.
Yeah, and and I think just breaking down the barriers internationally, even locally where we are in San Francisco, not everyone can come to the museum for programs. So yeah, this is really, really nice. How are you and where are you joining us from?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I am joining you from Canada. That's where I'm based at the moment, in Ontario. I move around a lot, as you could probably see from my CV, but I've been here in Canada since about 2016. And before that, I was based in Johannesburg. And I still sort of feel based in both places. My practice feels kind of based in both places. But yeah, at the moment, Canada is home.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I understand you have some early childhood experiences in Canada as well. So it's almost one of your returning to your roots in some kind of a way.
For sure. Yeah, my father is Canadian. And we spent some time here when I was much younger. So early, like when I was 10, maybe until just before I turned 15. So those rocky, hard, formative years were born here in Canada. So yeah, certainly it's one of many places that I consider something of a home.
Awesome. So I love to just find out everyone's story about, how you came into the path of being an artist. There's so many entry points to becoming an artist. And I know that we have some aspiring artists joining us today and some students as well. So, what was that journey for you? Did you always know that you were going to be an artist, from a very young age? Or was there some pivotal event that happened for you where you were like, okay, this is the path?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. I know that I always had kind of an impulse to make or be creative, that my upbringing, I was always drawing, I was always dragging my families into plays and performances that I was doing in the backyard, so kind of making things. Oh, you might hear my son in the background. I
love it.
So, but yeah, making things has always been something that has always been a language that I used. But I was also really good at school, not necessarily particularly intelligent, but really did well at doing well at school, knew how to make teachers happy and sort of perform academically. So it meant that I had, this other pull to kind of pursue more of a kind of traditional academic future in terms of my career. And that's what I chose at first. I chose the kind of sensible line and was on the pre-med track for a while, and kind of had this idea about combining my interest in kind of international cultures and medicine. And that was right up until the middle of my undergraduate, maybe even towards the end. But then I was always kind of secretly packing my course load with all of these art classes that I was, every elective that I could find a way to squeeze in was a drawing class or a painting class. And I kind of became like a bit of a stepchild of the art department and spent a lot of time there. And it was sometime in the middle of my, I want to say it was probably my third year in undergrad that, you know, I was sitting in some biochemistry class, like working really hard on something that was for my art class. You know, my notes were filled with sketches and drawings. I wasn't really paying attention to what was going on in the course. And it felt more and more that I was kind of being called to honor this other side of myself, this other kind of language that was more natural to me. So, so yeah, I kind of came to that decision just before my final year in university, and I applied for a really wonderful opportunity through, I did my undergraduate at UNC Chapel Hill, but at the time, Spelman College in Atlanta had this amazing international residency program led by a really incredible mentor and teacher of mine, Arturo Lindsay, who for years was giving students the opportunity to spend about a month in the rainforest of Panama to just make work. And I kind of was introduced to this opportunity by a teacher and decided to apply, and felt a bit like I was in disguise. You know, it was like nobody knew that I wasn't an artist. They just started calling me an artist since I was in the residency, and gave me a studio and assumed I had a practice. And it was sort of this really wonderful kind of dislocation from an old identity, and then just kind of being dropped into a new identity. It was really liberating. So I would say that summer from my junior year to my senior year in university was that kind of pivotal time where I just kind of committed to just trying this thing. I spent my senior year working really closely with teachers in UNC's art department, especially Juan Logan, who is an incredible American artist. I was fortunate to work with Michael D. Harris, rest in peace, who just recently passed away. So yeah, there was some really I got placed with some really supportive people who saw that even though I had this kind of roundabout pathway, they still supported me. So yeah.
That is absolutely incredible. And to come in so late, you know, in the game, you know, we're often, you know, told that so that someone has to go through this long trajectory of learning and practicing and developing the skills. But yeah, junior year is, you know, especially for someone who has created the achievements that you have, and, you know, gone so far with your art. I think that's huge. You know, you just mentioned the residency in the rainforest in Panama. And, you know, I know that, you know, just looking, we will look at your art for folks that are here. We will project some images, but I can even see images right behind you of, you know, flora and possibly fauna, you know, behind you, and you know, volcanoes and mountains. You know, these themes that keep repeating in your work. Is that in direct response to this residency that you had in, you know, completely immersed in nature, or is your constant revisiting of natural elements, is that really coming from somewhere else?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. I know, looking at my work, and just even across the whole trajectory of the different kinds of work I've made, that there is something really important about space and place and land and landscape in the stories that I'm telling in my work. And in many ways, landscape is kind of another character in the work. It's sort of not just a situating tool, you know, to kind of locate us, whether it's somewhere lush or tropical or imaginary or of some other world. So yeah, I do spend a lot of time, as much as my work is maybe known for being figurative and narrative, building kind of worlds and landscapes, and with sort of newer work, interior or architectural spaces, has always really been important. That a sense of place is kind of inextricable from the stories I'm telling. And certainly, as you say, there's a lot of references to the places that I've actually been. So growing up, in my younger life, my mother and father worked in different fields that had us moving around a lot. So I think by the time I was 18, we'd lived in Sri Lanka, Malawi, Sudan, Canada, the United States, like all sort of South Africa, so spending years here and there. And this kind of, constant moving and really rapidly changing visual impressions as a young person, to kind of be suddenly finding yourself in this new space, in this new culture, in this new climate, and taking it for granted, being so young that you don't realize that that's, really special or really rare. And so it kind of, all of those impressions get dragged into my practice when I'm thinking about space. Is it, the feeling of kind of expanse when I think of home and Botswana, this kind of epic flat landscape? Or is it the kind of heavy, hot, wet landscape of North Carolina and the American South? That all of these kind of inform the narrative, and I feel I can kind of pull on them as I would a character. Like, okay, I'm in this space, and this is kind of the landscape that's speaking this story.
That is amazing. That's amazing. I love to learn that. Yeah, and it changes your landscape. I'm just drawn constantly to the flowers behind you,
Yeah.
and the
very dazzling.
Yeah, the extreme realism of those, and then other times, the landscape is almost these geometric, I don't know, almost fractal type, coming apart kind of thing, or coming together. That also feels like maybe that also is a tie-in to your background in sciences and medicine,
for sure. I'm so glad that resonates. All those years of calculus that I never wanted to use again, still coming into the practice. But for sure. I think of the way I make my images as a sort of a research practice or a citational practice, where I'm pulling at these different signifiers to kind of build my own story. And I think the scientific aesthetic certainly comes from my own background in the sciences, or curiosity about kind of the structure of the universe, a curiosity about stars or planets. And so I sort of take great liberties to make reference to these complex theories in science, or kind of speculative physics, even if I have no business thinking about it, or even trying to understand it, that there's something exciting about kind of pulling up something of a poetry out of hard sciences, or out of kind of theoretical sciences about the world and its structure. I would have to mention also the work of Kalia Brooks, who was an incredible curator, who invited me in 2011 to participate in an exhibition at MoAD in Brooklyn when she was the senior curator there. And it was an exhibition called Feed Your Head, the origins of the scientific aesthetic in contemporary African art.
Oh, wow.
And it was such a fascinating curatorial concept that she developed, and she paired 4 artists, each with a scientist of some sort, or the work of a scientist of some sort. And so I was really fortunate to be paired with an incredible genius of a man named Dr. Sylvester Gates, who is a Black physicist at the University of Maryland, and has done this incredible research. I mean, his research is way beyond anything that I could reasonably understand. He's thinking about string theory and kind of quantum physics, and these really kind of fringe speculations on the structure of the universe. And one of the little kind of analogies that he uses that I found so fascinating was that he's done a lot of work looking at the geometry embedded in ancient Adinkra symbols from West Africa and Ghana, and finding that the geometries embedded in these symbols really mimic some of the codes that are embedded in the structure of the universe, that there's this kind of symmetry.
Wow.
And I know, it's really cool and crazy. And again, beyond my in terms of the deep theory of it, it's well beyond my understanding or knowledge. But I would really say my participation in that show and that kind of introduction to Dr. Gates's work was hugely influential for years, in terms of how I thought about space, in terms of how I wanted to represent space or the universe. There was years where I was, integrating constellations and kind of mapping moon cycles, all out of kind of being so fascinated by, again, finding this poetry in this really scientific language. Sorry, that was kind of a long answer.
No, that was a fascinating answer, actually. And thank you so much for today. I noticed for those who are joining us on Zoom today has taken all of those links and implanted them into the chat. So that's great. If you want to find out more about the exhibition at MoCADA, as well as the Dr. Gates research that Pamela mentioned, that is really amazing. I also want to kind of think about your family and the role that they have played into your development as an artist, or even the stories that you tell through the art. You mentioned moving around, and living, sounds like just an amazing life as a child, of experiencing so many different places and so many different cultures and languages even. But yeah, what about your parents or other family relatives? Do they play, an active role in the stories that you tell through your art, or the way that you, I don't know. I know you do a lot of painting. You do you do everything, actually: video, painting, drawing, installations. I'm not sure what you don't do, but with all of these choices, with all of these, the themes and even the materials that you use, does your family history at least?
Yeah, and it's such a good question to ask, or for me to think about in this very moment, because I know that my work has always made very kind of coy reference to my own autobiography, and that I've been really protective about what I allow to be kind of known or understood about the ways that the work might kind of emerge from, or at least reflect my own personal background. And I think my hesitancy to answer that, to kind of divulge those details are, for the reasons that that Black artists are often showcased in a particular way, and that our lives and our struggles and our backstories tend to kind of be at the forefront, and then our work sort of falls to the background as kind of a side effect of these fascinating struggles that we've all had to kind of endure. And so I've kind of often shied away from sharing a lot of the kind of family references in the work. And yet now, in this moment, I'm sitting in my studio and I'm seeing, I'm at the end kind of almost of this new body of work that I'll be showing in New York in September at Gallery Lelong. I'm very excited about the show. And it's kind of the first body of work where I'm being really, where the work really comes from really specific references in my own background. So
wow.
There's a lot of references to my grandmother's home in Botswana, this beautiful kind of compound in a rural village just on the border between Botswana and South Africa. And this idea actually of borders, or always being at the edge or at the border between kind of one or multiple identities, really fuels the work, has maybe always fueled the work, but where I sit right now with the work, I'm really able to identify these really personal connections. So my father is Canadian and my mother was from Botswana. They met in Botswana. And as I mentioned, my father, when I was 4, started working in international development. And it meant that we moved around a lot together. And we're always this kind of band of aliens, no matter where we went, that we were suddenly transplanted, as I said, over and over again in these different places. And so when it comes to kind of ideas around my identity and how my family background shapes that, I think that kind of pursuit of home, or kind of a pursuit of wholeness, has always been in the work. And I've sort of kept it at a distance by talking about, science fiction and outer space and mythology, all of these stories of the hero's quest, the pursuit of this kind of mythological hero that I would invent to sort of create or remove. And I'm looking at the work now, and it's so close. You know, there's images from my mother's funeral. There's stuff from you know, really personal experiences, and I don't necessarily think the specifics of the personal are necessary to engage with the work or to enter the work. But yeah, it's interesting to challenge myself to be much more candid about those ways that the work does come from this, yeah, quite tender and intimate place.
I love that. I love that. I think, you know, I do want to get into the character Asmi, because
Sure,
I'm
yeah.
extremely fascinated by that character, and, you know, the role played, you know, through so much of your work. Do you think that perhaps it's now that you've, I mean, basically, I mean, I don't have to say it, you have fully, completely arrived. You know, you're not an emerging artist. One might even argue that you're beyond, you know, the mid-career and really into the well-established zone as an artist. So do you feel like maybe that moving into that space, with this, you know, exhibition coming up at this world-renowned gallery, right? Do you think that now frees you of the bonds of having to be, you know, pigeonholed as a Black artist or an African artist? I've
Right.
read your interviews where you're just like, I'm a Canadian artist also. Like, why do I have to fall into this very narrow box for people to feel like they understand my work? So do you think, is it now like this moment where you're free to
Yeah.
kind of explore these dialogues
Yeah.
without pigeonholing yourself?
Yeah, I think you use the word free. I think about this idea of what it means to be free, what I mean, what freedom really is as an artist. And I know that there's, at least in my own practice, there were piles and piles of obligations that I felt I dragged around into my studio all the time. And you know, whether it was the kind of constant feeling of, you better make it worth it, you chose to do this, instead of, you know, being a doctor, you know, you better make this really, you know, really real. And so that kind of feeling of making work that has a kind of direct social impact or a direct kind of political read became yeah, something to navigate always. And the politic in my work, I mean, is insistent. There is kind of a very strong kind of raging voice underneath all of the work. And I think as a younger artist, I really felt obliged to directly carry, you know, kind of current or even historical political moments in the work. And I feel as I get older, maybe more mature as an artist, I find myself giving myself permission to be free, to really think about what is it that I'm thinking about on my own terms. When I start to ignore the kind of perceived audience or who I'm perceived to be speaking to, or what my perceived context is, when I liberate myself from those expectations, or from the expectation that I be kind of a constant translator of my experience as a Black woman, as a whatever, however way I choose to kind of be identifying in the moment, yeah, letting go of those suddenly opened a huge new world of questions. So then what am, you know, what am I talking about? And what is important? What is critical? What are the images that I'm, yeah, deciding to leave as a legacy? And I think so for somebody whose job it is to make pictures, I take it really seriously. On the one hand, okay, maybe it's a frivolous job, but I think we're living in an age where we understand the power politically of an image, and how international policy now is based on an image that you might scroll by. You know, worlds are being built and collapsed based on images that you might just scroll by. So I feel, on the one hand, yes, I make pictures, but it feels like a really critical job at this time, especially when we're kind of, really struggling to insist on our own liberties and identities and existence, just to live. So yeah, I guess that would be how I'd answer that.
I completely agree with everything you just said. Yeah, I think the role of the artist is more critical now than ever. You know, particularly now that images as you said, worlds. I love, what you just, the imagery that you just described of worlds being built or collapsed based on singular images. That's just, that's one for the records. I'm gonna keep that one really close to myself. I also do want to kind of shout out Andrea Chung,
Oh,
who is a
are you
mutual
there,
friend.
Andrea? Oh,
Andrea is
nice.
here and gave you a
We
shout
went,
out.
yeah, Andrea. We went to school together.
That is phenomenal. Yeah, she told me that earlier this week. I was like, of course, the coolest people know each other. And then today also just, comments on what you just said, with your work, of that being really liberating, but also difficult at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to shout that out as well. I'm going to go ahead and share some images so we can start talking through some of your work.
Oh.
But I would also, after we do that, love to see anything that you're able and willing to share with us. I'm already really intrigued by this little corner that we're getting of the work. So let's see, just 1 second. And here we go. I wanted to scroll back in time a little bit with your work. So I could really talk about some of these things that that I've been mentioning with the geometric, almost like fractal like relationship with the landscape, and the figures, and then the mountains, the prevalence of these mountains in various stages. So yeah, what's the significance of the mountains? And oh my
I think
gosh,
this is such a good work to start with, because these works that were made 2015, 2016, they were made when I was still based in South Africa. And when I first arrived in South Africa in about 2010, I had been, my practice sort of as a student or as an much younger artist just before moving to Joburg. My work was very figure-based. And I arrived in Johannesburg and suddenly had a bit of an identity crisis and as an artist, and felt really suspicious of my use of the figure, and kind of removed it completely from the work, and spent several years really kind of thinking about abstraction. Again, this is where ideas around math and science really started to dominate the work. Thinking about grids and these sort of like mathematical theories that are used to try to describe the structure of the earth, geology and other kind of earth sciences. And then I got pregnant in 2015, and it was impossible to not deal with my body during that time, to not deal with bodies in general, that it was such a transformative, crazy, empowering, terrifying experience that it was just undeniable that the figure would return, and I guess it never really went away after that. And I have been drawing mountains and volcanoes for years, and people always ask me about the volcanoes, and I have this really nicely fleshed out answer to the question about volcanoes, and I've never until now really thought about why it is mountains. Yes, volcanoes, because of all the psychology that you can read into it, but I was born in Botswana, the flattest country
oh wow
in the world, that there's not even a hill, let alone a mountain anywhere. And certainly all of the of all the places that I lived, there were I think about Sri Lanka as being a really mountainous island. But even that, these aren't mountains of a jungle island like Sri Lanka. These are, ancient kind of glacial mountains, I'm realizing. And so I think this kind of formation of these hard cliffs in the work signal a kind of primordiality that I'm interested in the work, as sort of like an origin point, or kind of an ancient, sort of starting point of kind of crush and tension and eruption and formation, of just earth and form. So yeah, I think that would be my answer, and I've never had to think about mountains really before.
I love that. I love that. It coming from this ancient place and these formations, and and then I feel like that also has some play off of this figure. And in this one,
Mm-hmm.
there's figures, like, are they performing acrobatics? Are they
Mm-hmm.
falling? Are they swimming? I'm not, I'm not quite sure
Yeah.
how I should feel about that, but it doesn't feel
Yeah.
scary or,
No,
or
I know
like
from the
doom.
title, from the title, I know I was thinking about Octavia Butler's writing, of course, and the
Yes.
parable of the sower. And I think I don't think I'll ever forget the first time that I read the first page of that book. I don't know how familiar people are, but the very first page where it's just this kind of mysterious, you're dropped into this mysterious moment where this character is talking about flying and talking to God. And it was the first time I'd read anything like that, that just doesn't bother to catch you up with the world that's been built.
Yeah.
I think that's what's so wonderful about Octavia Butler's writing, is that she doesn't bother to catch you up. You're gonna figure it out and you're gonna come on this
Mhm.
journey or you're gonna get left. And I think, yeah, the kind of power of this character in Parable of the Sower, even the title kind of always hung around with me. On the one hand, you kind of take it for granted, as sort of thinking about whatever a biblical reference or kind of
Mm.
some sort of origin story. But yeah, the idea of seed and spreading seed, and that seed being kind of hope or something unfixed in time, or unfixed kind of in a physical sense, was always really fascinating to me. And so this idea of flying, of floating, sort of transcending, this kind of apocalyptic moment, I think always stuck with me.
Wow. Wow. That's beautiful. And yeah, you just added so many new layers to this work for me. Yeah, the works that are pulled are some of my personal favorites.
Oh, good. I love that. Thank
I, I definitely had to scale back because at some point it would have been every single piece that you've ever made. So
you.
yeah,
Thanks. Yeah, I
yeah,
love this
and
little one. Yeah.
yeah, and this one, as well, is like you've got we've got these geological forms, but then they're being broken down into the
Mm-hmm.
grid, and then the different, just the different marks, hand marks, that
Mm-hmm.
you've made, where um, I can see your pencil, I can see your paintbrush, I can see, you know, these different
Mm-hmm.
moments, and then it's all collapsing together into, I guess, like a village or
Yeah.
a town.
Yeah. I was thinking a lot, also with these little works around this year, I was thinking and looking a lot at sort of early 19th century um, studio photography portraits.
Mm.
These ones, and I've spoken about this in the past, but especially these super contrived ones with these painted backdrops and this sort of faux fancy furniture. And the sitters are often, especially if the sitters are Black or brown, they are kind of used also in this kind of artifice of a kind of fictionalized other,
Mm.
and so I was just kind of poring over all of these examples, both of European and also, African studio photography. There's a wonderful archive and history there as well. But as I was looking more and more, something that I started to really notice about some of these pictures was these that I loved being able to see these kind of glimpses around the edges of the photos, where you could kind of see other potential props or background options in the photographer's studio, right? So this
Yeah,
sitter
yeah.
happens to have chosen like day at the beach, or the mountain landscape or whatever, but they could have chosen the city walkway or that Eiffel Tower or some other backdrop. And so yeah, suddenly seeing these curtains layered and all of these back sets waiting at the edges of this image was such a personal connection to me, that suddenly by just drawing one of these curtains over, this would create a whole new situation and a whole new location for this sitter, really. I was curious about where agency lies in a lot of these pictures, and where
Mm.
kind of authenticity and sort of subjectivity exists in this history of photographing Black and brown people. And I really wanted to to figure a new story that was beyond the that could somehow reach beyond the intended use of this kind of imagery, right? So this imagery is intended to signal empire, to signal, as I said, the other. And I wanted to see if there was something else available. And so by referencing this photography and starting to kind of play with garment and a sort of slippage between attire and landscape, foreground and background, what's kind of constructed or abstracted and what's naturalistic. And so I found these little panels and these little arrangements to be really convenient ways of kind of packing several references into one image.
That is amazing. And the title, the Incense Burner, how does that?
Yeah. Oh, I forgot to mention. So this piece is actually a direct reference to a photograph of a beautiful sort of unnamed Afro-Peruvian woman, and the photograph is called the Incense Burner, or just Incense Burner, and it was taken by the Carruthers brothers. I think they were a pair of studio photographers who did this thing as their business. And so the image is just the stunning Black woman in Victorian dress holding this kind of lantern in her hand, and as poised and kind of contained as she may exist in the photo, there again you always see this kind of insistence that there is, despite the attachment of the kind of European signifiers, you know, that she's dressed to look civilized, she's dressed to be kind of always a thing to other against whiteness or Europeanness, that pushing all of that aside, there's still this gaze that insists on something realer and something that is not kind of available to the casual viewer, something that sort of signals to me hundreds of years later that I am seeing you and you can see me, and we are doing this together. We are connected through this thread of representation, of trying to kind of take power within these kind of structures that would deny or complicate our access to power. And I find that so interesting, that slippage between, you know, who is subjected and who still kind of can find a way to claim or just take agency in these images.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I love that. With Today, who is in the background, who's been chatting with everyone, we do this. We do this monthly tour where we virtually, where we actually go into the archives and we find these images. And you know, I think it's really interesting to look at the images, particularly of Black folks from around the world, really. And I think it gets more interesting actually when you start looking outside of the US at some of these images, where sometimes, you know, as you start to look into their eyes, you almost feel like you can feel what they were thinking, or you know, you can put the words together.
And I think it's the quality of this old sort of early photography that gives you there's a patina in there that insists on itself.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I love that. And I feel like you've also captured that feeling, even though I'm not looking at, there's no facial features, just the body language is also giving me that sense of self ownership. Andrea says, as long as I've known you, origins and wandering seems to constantly appear, and yet they can be seen as opposing actions. Can you talk more about that? Is your protagonist searching for something? I love that question.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Yes, this protagonist is constantly searching, and I think that might be what defines many of the characters in my work, a kind of a search. And when I think of search also implies longing, you know, and desire. And I think that kind of private longing for belonging or for home is underlying a lot of the characters in the work and fuels a lot of their wandering. So what the seeker kind of represents in a kind of an archetypal in an archetype or a mythological archetypal sense, I know that you wanted to ask me a little bit about ASME, and maybe this will sort of get us into that.
I love it.
But I invented this alter ego to really as a device to kind of filter through or to sort of cycle through the, I don't know if it's psychological or sort of social or even maybe political implications in this hero's quest. So, and it's every story that we know, from, as Joseph Campbell says, from Star Wars to every kind of origin story, it's the hero's quest. It's the hero who has a mission, who leaves everything behind, sets out on a quest, gets a traveling companion, loses everything, sacrifices everything, practically dies, maybe does actually die, goes to the underworld, comes back from the underworld. All of these moments are kind of every story that we ever tell ourselves. And so the wanderer, the seeker was always a very convenient kind of character for me. And that I think that's who ASME was. And I say was as if she's not really, I just haven't thought of, I don't use her as much as I used to. Maybe that's what the difference is about ASME, but I needed this hero to sort of start this journey. And I think that's why I invented her. I invented her to also stand, as her name implies, to stand as me in all of these stories, to kind of be my surrogate or my avatar as I try to kind of situate or pick my way through all of this kind of tangle of culture, geography, history, politics, economics. Where to kind of make sense of it.
That is amazing. I love that idea. And I think, even if you're not currently referencing ASME, I think the presence of this alter ego, and the journeys and the stories, I think they also are part of creating this thread that one can read throughout your work, which is why I'm just like, I want to look and talk about every single piece, though I know we can't do it within the course of an hour. Because each one I think is just so significant. So I'm gonna I think I'm gonna jump ahead just a little bit in here, because again, like I said, I have images that I can't show. But I want to talk about like your color palette. I think that's one of the unifying factors in your work throughout the last decade. I'm seeing this pretty consistent color palette that you use. Your choice is also to let your pencil marks show through. That's one of those things in art school where they're like, if you do a painting, make sure none of the canvas shows, make sure none of your pencil lines show. And so you're breaking the rules, to a degree, but to really great, wonderful effect. What got you to do that?
Because I've always thought it's only recently that my work has taken on this really sort of painterly language now, like recently as of maybe, it feels recent to me maybe because my practice I've always described as being based in drawing and working on paper, drawing on walls, even the animations I think of as just kind of, working out of a language of collage and drawing. And what I love so much about drawing is its kind of provisional nature, that it's this thing on the way to being something else. And yet it really, just like writing, it preserves so much in the process and in the struggle of making an image that I love to let that show, to let that struggle and the history of how long it takes me or how many tries it takes me to get a particular image, to me feels, something important to understanding the way the image is built or made up. I think allowing the drawing to sort of still be so visible in the work also offers this sort of opportunity to think about movement or the cinematic or kind of a blur of movement, of gesture, which is kind of one of the early things that you learn when you're learning about drawing, is kind of a searching line, a line that you kind of get your arm really moving. And that's the work of kind of your first kind of proper drawing class, is like getting used to just getting that arm to not stop moving and not gripping the tool so tightly, and trying to get a sense of gesture through your whole body as you're working. And I hate to lose that, you know, I hate to not sort of share all of that movement and all of that gesture in the work. And so, yeah, I let it stand. And I think it also just is a bit of a, as you say, a bit of a confrontation with this sort of history of painting and what proper painting is, I guess. So yeah, just being honest about, yeah, the way things are made seems important to the image.
Oh, weird. Okay, I'm sorry. Apparently the chat is closed off. I have no idea why that would be a thing. Sorry, folks. I will change that. I think today you just changed it. Thank you. I'm so sorry. For folks, we do want to hear from you in the chat now. And so now it sounds like you can. I am so sorry about that. And thank you for informing me. Yeah, I'm really gonna spend some time back here in the 2016, 17 to 18 pieces.
That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a good one to talk about, actually. Yeah.
This one is just absolutely splendid. It's just gorgeous. It's one of the pieces that I would just absolutely love to live with. Just so you know.
Just so you know.
Just so you know, in case you need to clear out anything from your studio, need some extra space.
Thanks. Yeah, this so the image here comes out of some work that I did at a really wonderful residency in Texas called Art Pace, which I did in 2018. And I at the time, as you might remember, I'd been looking at all of these studio photography portraits. That's the correct order. And because I had this kind of wonderful space and this really incredible fabrication team to support my ideas and my thinking while I was in residence there, I had this idea to build my own kind of diorama of a photographer's studio. And so built these kind of different levels of floors, and it's, pulled all of this kind of pretend replica furniture and painted my own backdrop, which, by the way, is kind of a take on Robert S. Duncan's Land of the Lotus Eaters, which is one of my favorite paintings, kind of the only Black romanticist landscape painter making those kinds of vistas in the time. And then I invented these 7 sisters. So in addition to Asmi, then there's this other kind of cast of characters. And I invented attire for them that kind of references several kind of historical and cultural moments, and just started playing with them in space, photographing them in space. And this session of photographing, working with photographers and making this installation and inventing these characters and performing as them has generated so many interesting questions in my practice. And even now I'm looking at work in my studio that still has this diorama, and it has some thread of this little world that I made. And so each of the sisters had their own little backstory, whether it was loose or kind of really specific. And this one that I named Landlord, she was kind of dressed as a sort of a ranchera / kind of self-made woman / woman who could walk into a bank but could also maybe wrangle some cows, that this sort of well held together corseted character was the landlord, who whose money's never funny, who who's kind of got it all together. And yet I wanted there to be a little bit of a breakage, so you can kind of see subtlety when it comes to kind of the way that I use gesture and the body. I have a background from another lifetime as a dancer, and so I'm really specific about gesture and the position of the body, and it's really intentional. So she's kind of well put together, veiled, organized, all snatched up, and she's got this kind of habit of tugging on her skirt, right? That's the crack in the facade, that she's holding on to her skirts. There's an edge there. And I quite love this sort of solidarity of this particular view amongst all of this kind of opulence and like lusciousness, deluxe velvet tufted gorgeousness around her, and this sort of aloneness, I think was something important to sort of think about for me.
I didn't realize that you had a background as a dancer, and now as I look at your work, I'm like, oh, it makes so much sense. There is always like this tension in the way that the body is standing or being held. That again, I think says so much. Even in a situation where I can't see a face, I can't see a gesture, but I can see so much through the body language. I love learning that about you. That's incredible. Because of time, think that there's all these pieces that I definitely want to get to, but let's see, actually, I do want to get to the installation before we cut out. Dynasty.
So here it is again. You can kind of see that checkered floor, those boots, those are still from that, from those characters. So this piece, Dynasty, was commissioned by the Museum of Contemporary Art in Toronto for the MoCA 2021 triennial, I guess they're calling it. I was just kind of offered this space in this museum with these big kind of cement pillars that create this very distinct kind of arch to the ceiling that immediately made me think about opera house or a theater or a set, a theatrical performance of some sort. And so I really kind of worked with that as a starting kind of compositional structure. I wanted to reference spectacle, billboard, sets, artifice, the kind of fanfare, funfair entrances, a kind of traveling show that arrives and is kind of put up precariously and then packed back down and moves on to the next dusty city. And the feeling that I wanted was of a, I don't know if it translates, but that sort of sound and flash of movement when sort of birds take flight. So a gunshot or a clap that then creates this kind of splash or spray, so the birds and the foliage and this sort of piercing spears up into the sky, contrasted with this sort of really held together, hand folded, knees pressed together figures who I kind of deny access to. You don't get to see their faces, you don't get to see much about them, but you know a lot about them because of the way they're kind of intertwined and kind of held in place together on this little whatever perch or chair. And so that kind of flash of movement and then stillness, and then this kind of potential danger is what I think of when I look at the volcano. Sure. But when I look at these arranged boots, like, oh, that backstage of the kind of chorus getting together, or those kind of moving of troops through across landscape or through space. So the kind of shuffling of anticipatory action, like the boots together, the little dusty heels, kind of gathering that little momentum towards some kind of movement that could be dangerous, could be violent, could be radical, could be revolutionary. It's not known, and it's sort of underneath the surface always.
Oh, wow. I would love to see this. Diana says this work is so special and beautiful in person. I'm jealous. I wish I had the chance to see this in person.
Which Diana is that? Is that Diana Biles?
Biles, yes.
Oh,
yes.
Hi, Diana. So nice to see. Thank you for joining. Wow.
Wow. And so many people got to see it. Fiona has seen it. I'm jealous. So yes, I agree with Andrea. We need to bring this to the West Coast.
Oh, I would love for this to go anywhere. Yes, I'm really proud of this work.
As you should be. I think I have another just like side angle that just to show folks the depth and the way that it was constructed.
Yeah, I worked with a designer to really help me compose this. We wanted it to be like freestanding and safe, obviously. But we also knew that this kind of back view of all of the infrastructure that holds this thing in place, I wanted that kind of chaos to be visible. But
yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. And you carried that out. I'm gonna stop the share now because I definitely would love for us to be able to, you know, anything that you would like to share with us in the studio right now.
How would I do a quick, not too much talking walkthrough? Because like I said, this is really fresh, like fresh as in potentially still wet.
Wow. I feel so honored to be able to get that.
Everybody from my gallery is here. It's dry. Everything's dry.
It is very ready.
It's all ready.
I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera just so folks can really focus.
I will turn my camera. Okay.
Wow. Look at this. I mean, just the scale alone is incredible.
I'm calling this one Front Room.
Wow.
And this is Lamb's Heart.
Just the quality of your painting is, so stunning.
This is a favorite. It's called The Committee. These are all mostly oil and pencil on wood panel or on linen. These are kind of stacked up, so you'll just get a little view.
Wow.
This is Frangipani.
Oh my goodness, you're working on so many. I see why the colors, you know, find their way throughout, because you're working on so many pieces simultaneously. Wow. I hear you, Andrea. Andrea says, I'll take that one. Oh, and this is what we've been looking at.
Yeah,
so gorgeous.
This is, sorry, you'll see my little makeshift desk if I can move out of the way. This is called Garden Girl.
Oh my goodness. Your talent is just mind-blowing.
And this is called Sinner Get Ready.
Wow. Oh my goodness, the face. I didn't notice that before. Wow.
Here's that same couch from my diorama.
Oh my goodness.
And that's Robert S. Duncanson's painting as well. So yeah, it's fun to kind of now be like referencing my referencing.
Yeah, for sure. Really nice.
So there you go, little studio visit.
That is beautiful. Oh my gosh. I thank you so much for this.
It's my pleasure. I hope that wasn't too short, but
no, that was perfect. And I can't wait to see this work at Gallery Lalong. Oh my goodness, that is phenomenal. If you're looking at the comments, just, you know, if you get a chance to look through them to what everyone is saying.
Hi, Noah.
Yes, you have so many fans. Yeah, just kind of, you've given us you know, that quick walkthrough. Can you talk about your process a little bit? What is your process looking like? Is this all formulated, or do you formulate kind of the composition as you're going along?
Yeah, often so the images I think come to mind. Like often, I mean, I don't do a lot of preparatory sketching. Like all the drawing happens on the surface. I do play with collage as a way of kind of understanding compositionally what I'm doing or what references I'm making. So any one image that kind of emerges in my mind will then come with like a folder of reference images. So it's then this landscape, and then, oh yeah, that shoe, and I need the dress from that other painting, and I need, so there's this sort of process of gathering a bunch of references towards making an image. And then it always starts with drawing. And drawing is the funnest and it's the hardest, but it's where I feel that everything is kind of started. And from there, it's just a matter of kind of building layers, either with more drawing or with paint that obscures the drawing, and then excavating back down. So it's constantly kind of building and like sort of getting back to the origins and building and then kind of taking it back. And I'd say that's the process. It's I think quite intuitive, but again, as I say, really informed by a kind of rich archive of references that I've been kind of building over the years.
Oh my goodness, yes, and we can see those. I love seeing something familiar pop back through, and then it's almost like it takes on this new meaning as it appears in a new piece. Yes, you have always been brilliant, as Andrea says. Yes, I completely agree. Completely agree with that. Yeah, someone asked in the questions also, Sue wants to know, how do you apply meaning to the layering, the transparency of elements that are on top of one another within your paintings?
Yeah, this thing of being able to see through layers feels really important. And I think it does come from maybe a little bit from my kind of academic background. And even after I finished my MFA, and one of the first sort of jobs I had when I moved to South Africa was in kind of research in a museum. And so I've kind of used this word citational, and there's, you know, really incredible artists now who use this term citational practice as kind of really fundamental to the way that I build an image. So I think being able to see through things, to see through to my reference or to the original reference, and also see the way that reference transforms or changes or gets attached to a new meaning is really a part of the work. And I think that, yeah, I think that's why I use layering so much.
That is incredible.
And wanting to kind of talk about more than one thing at a time. I mean, as you can see, I'm not one who's without things to say.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's sort of an urgency always in any image to say, I'm talking about this, and I'm also talking about this, and this, and also don't forget that. And layers and sort of like transparency helps to make those simultaneous references.
And I think that's really one of the parts about your practice that's so incredible, and also why there's so many images that as someone who's taking them in, you know, I can really just sit with them, and I find that rare in art, if you know, if that's okay for me to say, that, you know, it's especially, you know, as I go through your website, and I start to look at images, and I'm starting to make connections that I want to go back to. It's almost like an Octavia Butler novel where, you know, there's so many details. I need to take them in, and I need to remember what was referenced on page 1. Yeah, we don't see this that often. It's very, very rare that an artist goes so deep with their work. And I hope I'm not offending anyone by saying that, but I mean, but it's true. And Andrea also says earlier that you have a model practice. You know, I'm so thankful for you sharing this with us today. I kind of want to just close out with, you know, tell us what you have coming up next. You told us a little bit about the Gallery Lalong show that is at the end of September.
Beginning of September. So
beginning of September. Okay.
The show at Gallery Lalong, which I'm calling. It's actually the title of the show is "I Have Withheld Much More Than I Have Written," which is a line from Dion Brand's beautiful novel, The Blue Clark, which came out in 2018, I believe. And yeah, it's a show of painting. There's an animation installation as well, which I'm super excited about. We didn't get a chance really to talk about my animations. which I don't really see as separate from the rest of my practice. I just see it all as one thing. But yeah, for this show, we're kind of using this beautiful idea of a kind of Victorian diorama, or a kind of a viewing room as a framing device for this little animated work that I'm presenting too. And yeah, opens on the 8th. I'm very excited. And then I'm also working on a project early next year at the power plant in Toronto, which is a really exciting, wonderful space. I'm working with Noor Ale, who I think is on the call, or was at least here a moment ago. Hi. Hi, Noor. And Gaitan, who's also the senior curator, the director at the power plant. I'm very excited about that. It's a new site-specific work in this incredible, very, very tall space. Yes, and that's true. Andrea just mentioned that Sandra Brewster just had a very dope show there in that space. So I'm really glad to get to engage with that space as well. And yeah, there's a couple of projects in Europe as well lined up, maybe at the end of next year. So a few things in the pipeline. Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. And we can find out, where's the best place for folks to find out about everything that you have coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I think Instagram is where I make like announcements. I'm not so on there, but when I do anything happens, I will announce it there. Obviously Gallery Belong, and there will also be, I think, maybe some programming. I think there's a talk that's going to be planned for that weekend, the week of the opening. So yeah, between my Instagram and the Gallery Belong site, and also the power plant site, there should be plenty of opportunities to get news about my stuff.
Fantastic, fantastic. Pamela, thank you so much for this incredible talk. This has been so energizing, so informative, and believe it or not, I can't even believe I'm saying this. It makes me appreciate your practice even more, and I want to dive even deeper into it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this invitation. It's super useful to kind of get a chance to talk candidly about the work. It means a lot. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. Thank you for accepting the invitation. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. This has been a treat.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thank you, Sade. Thank you so much to everyone who participated.
Yes, yes. If you joined us late, this conversation will be immediately available on Museum of the African Diaspora's Facebook page following the conclusion of the talk. Hey, Vicky. And we will also have it posted on Museum of the African Diaspora's YouTube page by the end of this week. Thank you, everyone, and have a beautiful, beautiful, for you it's evening, right?
Yes.
Yes, yes. Have a beautiful evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. Bye. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.